Hello, my name is Gareth Harrison. I'm a student on the course Economic and Political Development in Developing Countries at the LSE. This is my submission for the online certificate Module 6 assessment. And the question we were asked to consider was to articulate 3 interventions to increase development performance in the country that we have been studying. And so far I've been looking at Ghana. It's a country that I've visited a number of times over the years through work, and I currently work for an organisation that explores oil and gas offshore and exports that globally. So we have significant operations in Ghana, and we have a lot of interaction with the government of Ghana, and so I thought it was suitable choice for my ongoing assignment. So in terms of the first intervention that I would recommend is in the field of global supply chain, which we covered in one of the modules. And the reason why I say that is because from my perspective, I don't feel as if Ghana really participates so much in global supply chains at the moment. Certainly not to the same extent as some other African countries are trying to develop. So in East Africa, for example, both Kenya and Ethiopia are quite well established in various, particularly manufacturing industries. And certainly there's been a lot of investment also in Tanzania. So there's quite a lot of activity in this space in east of the continent, but perhaps less so in the west, and certainly not as well formulated and established. So I guess my first intervention would be around enhancing Ghana's participation in global supply chains. One of the criticisms as to why it doesn't participate strongly at the moment is due to inadequate storage and poor transport infrastructure. And one of the developments that's happening is a lot of investment in, for example, the port at the city of Takoradi on the coast, with a view to enhancing both storage of goods, particularly those that require specialist storage like medicines, food, etc. And then it would need to develop the infrastructure of the port itself and its connectivity to other cities, not only in Ghana but in other West African states like Nigeria, Senegal, Ivory Coast, all of which have significantly larger populations than Ghana does. Ghana is quite a small population, so servicing the needs of a small population is not necessarily going to be what's required. The growth is potentially going to come through participating in global supply chains that service neighbouring countries with much larger populations and therefore larger consumer bases and larger, for example, manufacturing capacity. So that would be my first intervention, which I think would increase Ghana's participation in the global economy and make it a sort of renowned hub, if you like, a regional hub for West Africa in global supply chain terms. I suppose linked to that is the second intervention I would recommend, and that's around export-oriented industrialisation, which we covered in the same module as when we looked at import substitution in industrialisation. And what import substitution industrialisation really was looking at was around the imposition of tariffs, etc., and barriers to the purchase of imported goods, particularly imported finished goods, because it would allow the domestic industrialisation process to grow, because clearly it would become more expensive to import foreign goods, and therefore the manufacture of local substitutes would be good for the local economy. So in the same module as we looked at that, we looked at export-oriented industrialisation, which is something that particularly, for example, has been very successful in, say, South Korea, which has manufactured a lot of consumer goods, electronics, cars, phones, etc. So that's been very much a success story. And in my view, and having spent a lot of time in various West African markets, I would say there is a tremendous appetite for consumer goods among growing middle class right across the entire region of West Africa, and limited numbers of high-scale local producers. So again, linked to the first intervention, which was around becoming a sort of an important hub, regional hub in a global supply chain that would be part of, sort of global supply chains for other, leading industrial and manufacturing industries, is Ghana could look to incentivize local production for regional production, regional exports, so that they were not trying to export goods, across the Atlantic or into Europe, etc., because those are much more difficult markets to break into. But certainly there is sufficient demand across the West African coast and inland into Central Africa. And so that export orientation, if the industrialization facilities were present, then it would be possible for Ghana to export finished goods to their neighbours and grow their manufacturing base. There are regional trade blocks as well in West Africa. So there are, and increasingly there is the African Free Trade continental area. So the development of intra-African trade is going to be, I think, a very interesting area to watch over the course of the coming decades, because it's becoming increasingly more possible to export goods from one African state to another. And historically, that's been quite difficult through for a variety of reasons, whether that's logistics or transportation, poor connectivity, cargo planes, etc. The continent is huge. It suffers incredible challenges when it comes to infrastructure, but also through tariffs and quotas and localization in terms of policies that have sort of meant that intra-African trade has been quite low, and AFCTA is very much designed to break down those barriers and encourage development across African states so that there can be more trade between those states more easily. And so for Ghana to become an exporting country to neighbouring countries would be, I think, an enormously helpful development for them, because it introduces skills into the workforce. It brings in currency from trade. So I think there are a lot of reasons why that would be a useful intervention. And then finally, my third recommendation around interventions would be how the state interacts with the informal sector. And like most countries across sub-Saharan Africa and other regions of the world, there is a large and actually quite well developed informal sector. Whether that's, street side sellers from whom you can buy pretty much everything from, confectionery to soda to board games to car accessories. You'd be surprised at the entrepreneurial spirit, but certainly food, clothes, a huge range of goods is available from the informal sector on the roadside, in the slums of the cities, in the sort of the urban areas. So it's an incredibly large and quite well developed ecosystem that helps a lot of people survive financially. And so the state has to understand the value of that sector, whilst realising that trying to formalise it would probably be a step too far for a lot of people who would maybe disappear from the streets because it was no longer an attractive proposition to register for tax or register with the government, etc., etc. The street licenses, trading licenses, etc. That would all become too onerous and too expensive. So I think the government has to find a way to develop the informal sort of the benefits that the informal sector brings, whilst taking away some of the disadvantages in terms of counterfeiting and lack of taxes. So there must be perhaps a way that that the informal sector can be integrated somehow within the tax system, so it doesn't become too difficult or too expensive to comply, and yet still the informal sector can accommodate the needs of the people who work in it, who help their families survive, get their children into education through the money that they earn from the informal sector. So the government really needs to think about how it harnesses the energy and power and innovation of the informal sector for the benefit of all. So not try and sweep the informal sector away or regulate it or integrate it into the formal sector. There has to be a way to find a middle ground, if you like, so that the informal sector can retain some of the features that make it so important, whilst the government finding a way of bringing it to a quasi-official state so that it can benefit the wider economy rather than just individuals who go out on the streets and sell and then go home and then repeat the following day and do that 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. So there has to be some form of development of the informal sector because so many people are employed in it. So I think there are my 3 interventions that I would recommend. To summarise, it's the global supply chain. It's about making sure that Ghana is benefiting from global supply chains to an extent because of its position in West Africa, on the coast. It's got a good geography. And second one was around export-oriented industrialisation, so becoming maybe a regional exporter of goods, consumer goods, etc. And then third one is how to harness the power of the informal sector. And with that, I'll stop the recording and try and figure out how to upload it successfully. Thank you very much. I'll put references in the comments of the YouTube video when I upload it. Thank you.